My daughter had me removed from her wedding, and that same night she sent me the bill. I didn't cry when they asked me to leave. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't even ask why. I simply stood there for a moment, in the middle of a room filled with white roses and soft piano music, and nodded as if what had just happened made perfect sense. The wedding venue was everything Emily had dreamed of, an elegant estate just outside Napa Valley, with rolling vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. I had spent months helping her plan it, writing checks I told myself were gifts of love, not obligations. The chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting a warm golden glow across the polished floors, and guests in tailored suits and pastel dresses laughed softly over glasses of champagne. It was beautiful. Perfect even. And yet, in that moment, I had never felt more out of place. A young coordinator approached me with a tight, practiced smile, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Collins," she said gently, "Emily asked if you could step outside for a bit." For a bit. As if I were someone who had wandered into the wrong room. As if I weren't the woman who had raised the bride, who had worked double shifts for years to give her the life she now stood celebrating. I glanced across the room, searching for my daughter's eyes. Emily stood near the altar, radiant in her custom gown, her arm looped through her fiancé's, her smile effortless and bright. She didn't look at me. Not once. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress, the one I had chosen carefully because she once told me it made me look graceful. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they might shake. But they didn't. I walked toward the exit slowly, aware of the quiet shift in the room as a few guests noticed. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. The doors closed behind me with a soft click, muting the music, the laughter, the celebration that continued without interruption. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm against my skin, the air carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. I stood there for a moment, alone on the stone steps, listening to the distant hum of a life I had helped build but was no longer part of. I told myself there had to be a reason. A misunderstanding. Something I hadn't seen yet. Because surely, a daughter doesn't remove her own mother from her wedding without cause. I held on to that thought as I walked to my car, each step measured, controlled. I drove home in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead, my reflection faint in the windshield, composed, calm, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't until later that evening, when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter, that I realized being asked to leave had only been the beginning. The house felt quieter than usual when I stepped inside, as if the walls themselves had noticed something had shifted. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter with the same care I had used for years, aligning it neatly beside the bowl of keys, as though maintaining order in small things might keep the rest of my world from unraveling. The clock above the stove read 6:42 in the evening. The ceremony would be starting right about now. I could picture it clearly without being there. The music swelling, the guests rising to their feet, Emily taking those slow, measured steps down the aisle. I had imagined that moment so many times, always from the front row, always with a clear view of her face. Instead, I was standing alone in my kitchen, staring at a clock that seemed louder than usual, each tick echoing through the silence. I moved to the sink and washed my hands, though they were already clean. The water ran warm over my skin, grounding me in something real, something simple. I told myself there had to be a reason. Weddings were stressful. Emotions ran high. Maybe she had been overwhelmed. Maybe someone had said something. Maybe this was temporary. I dried my hands slowly and turned off the faucet. The silence returned immediately. I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, still in my dress, still wearing the small pearl necklace I had saved for special occasions. I had worn it on the day Emily graduated college. I had worn it when she got her first job offer. I had worn it today because I believed this was another one of those moments that mattered. I picked up my phone more than once, considering calling her, then setting it back down again. I did not want to cause a scene. I did not want to make things worse. So I waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The sky outside darkened, the last of the sunlight fading behind the trees, leaving only the reflection of the room staring back at me through the window. At 8:13, my phone finally lit up. Her name appeared on the screen, bright and familiar, the same name I had seen thousands of times over the years. For a brief second, relief washed over me. I thought perhaps she was calling to explain, to apologize, to say there had been some kind of mistake. I answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Mom, I need you to take care of the remaining balance for the wedding. The coordinator said there are still invoices that have not been paid." I did not speak right away. I thought I might have misunderstood. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly, my voice steady in a way I did not quite recognize as my own. "I have already contributed more than we agreed." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a small sigh, the kind people make when they believe they are being inconvenienced. "I know," she said, "but things went over budget. It happens. You said you wanted this day to be perfect, remember?" I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap, still and composed. "Emily," I said, "you asked me to leave your wedding." Another pause, shorter this time. "That was different," she replied. "We can talk about that later. Right now, this needs to be handled. They are expecting payment tonight." The words settled into the room like something heavy and unmovable. I realized then that she was not calling to explain. She was not calling to fix anything. She was calling because she expected me to do what I had always done. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not in pain, not in anger, but in recognition. Something had just become very clear. When I opened them again, the room looked the same. But I did not. She stayed on the line, waiting, as if silence were simply a delay in obedience rather than an answer in itself. I could hear faint music behind her, laughter rising and falling like waves in the distance, glasses clinking, voices overlapping in celebration. The wedding continued. It had not paused for me when I left, and it certainly would not pause now. "Mom?" she prompted, her tone tightening slightly. "I need to confirm with them. Are you going to take care of it or not?" I leaned back slowly against the couch, my fingers resting lightly on the fabric as though I were anchoring myself to something steady. For years I had responded quickly, efficiently. If Emily needed something, I found a way to provide it. If there was a problem, I solved it before it grew large enough to disturb her. That had been my role. Quiet. Reliable. Invisible in its consistency. "How much is left?" I asked. The question came out calm, almost neutral, and I could feel her relax on the other end, just slightly. She had expected resistance. Or perhaps she had not expected anything at all. "It is about $12,000, she said, as if she were mentioning the price of a dinner reservation rather than a sum that once would have taken me months to save. 12,000. I let the number settle in my mind without reacting. I thought about the checks I had already written. The deposits. The dress. The venue fees. The catering. Each one had been given freely, or so I had told myself. Gifts I had called them. Contributions to a day that was supposed to mean something. "They are saying the final payment is due tonight," she continued, her voice sharpening with urgency. "I do not want any issues with the venue. This is my wedding day." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, but to focus. My wedding day. The phrase echoed quietly. I remembered my own wedding, decades ago, small and simple, held in a modest church with folding chairs and homemade flowers. There had been no invoices waiting at the end of it. No expectations beyond love and commitment. When I opened my eyes again, I looked around the room. The same photographs lined the shelves. Emily as a child, missing her front teeth and smiling wide. Emily at 12, holding a science fair ribbon. Emily at 18, standing on the front porch with a suitcase, ready to leave for college. I had been in every one of those moments. Just outside the frame, making them possible. "Mom," she said again, more impatient now. "I need an answer." I inhaled slowly, then exhaled just as carefully. The answer formed not out of anger, but out of something quieter, something that had been building for a long time without my fully recognizing it. No, I said. There was a pause. A real one this time. Not the kind filled with expectation, but the kind filled with disbelief. What do you mean, no? She asked, her voice lower now, sharper at the edges. I kept my gaze steady on the photograph of her at 12, the one where she still reached for my hand without hesitation. I mean, I said, each word measured, I am not going to pay the remaining balance. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. For a moment, I could hear nothing from her side of the line. No music. No laughter. Just absence. Then she spoke again, and this time there was no softness left in her voice at all. After everything I have done, you are really going to do this to me today? I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was clear. Perfectly clear. No, Emily, I said quietly. I am just choosing not to do what I have always done. The line went silent for a moment, but I did not hang up. I had spent too many years ending conversations early, smoothing things over before they had a chance to settle into truth. This time, I stayed. I listened. On the other end, I could hear her breathing, uneven now, no longer controlled. The music in the background had faded, or perhaps she had stepped away from it. I cannot believe you are doing this, she said finally, her voice low but tight, like something being pulled too far. On my wedding day, of all days! I shifted slightly on the couch, my posture still straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Emily, I said, not raising my voice, not softening it either. You asked me to leave your wedding. There was a pause, shorter this time, followed by a quick exhale that sounded almost like irritation. You are making this into something it is not, she replied. It was just for a while. Things were hectic. You would not understand. I let those words settle. You would not understand. I thought about the years I had spent understanding everything without being asked. The late nights waiting up for her when she was a teenager. The mornings packing lunches before sunrise. The extra shifts, the missed vacations, the quiet sacrifices that never made it into conversations like this. Help me understand then, I said. There was a slight edge to my voice now, not sharp, but firm enough that even I noticed it. She hesitated. For the first time since the call began, she did not have an immediate answer. It was just easier this way, she said finally. There were a lot of people, a lot of moving parts. I did not want any complications. Complications. I looked around the room again, at the life that had once revolved around making sure she never had to deal with any. And I am a complication? I asked. Another pause. This one longer. That is not what I said, she replied quickly, but there was something missing in her tone now. Something uncertain. I did not press further. I did not need to. Some truths do not need to be argued. They simply exist, waiting for you to see them clearly enough. You have always made things harder than they need to be, she added after a moment, her voice regaining some of its earlier sharpness, as if she had found familiar ground again. I am just asking you to handle something simple. It is one payment. That is all. One payment. I almost repeated the words, but I stopped myself. Because it was never just one payment. It had never been just one anything. It was years. It was patterns. It was expectations built so slowly, and so consistently that they had begun to feel like facts instead of choices. No, I said again, more quietly this time, but no less certain. I am not going to do that. The silence that followed felt different now. Not confused. Not uncertain. Clear. Final. I could almost hear the shift in her mind, the moment she realized that the answer was not going to change. Fine, she said at last, her voice colder now, stripped of the earlier urgency. If that is how you want to be, then do not expect me to fix this later. I nodded slightly, even though she could not see me. I am not asking you to fix anything, I replied. I am simply choosing not to keep fixing everything myself. There was no response to that. Just a brief, hollow silence before the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it back on the table beside me. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt the same. Not emptier. Not heavier. Just different. I leaned back against the couch and let the stillness settle around me. For the first time in a very long time, I was not waiting for the next demand. I was not anticipating the next request. I was simply sitting there, in a quiet room, with a decision that finally belonged to me. The quiet in the house stretched longer than I expected, but it did not press down on me the way it once would have. I remained seated for a while, my eyes drifting across the familiar details of the room, each one holding a memory I had never questioned before. The framed photograph on the mantel caught my attention again, the one from Emily's 12th birthday. She had wanted a small party that year, nothing extravagant, just a few friends and a cake with too much frosting. I remembered staying up past midnight the night before, making sure every detail was just right because she had looked at me and said, "I want it to be perfect." I had nodded without hesitation, as if perfection were something I could always provide. I stood slowly and walked over to the mantel, picking up the frame with careful hands. The glass was cool against my fingers. In the picture she was smiling wide, her eyes bright, her hand wrapped tightly around mine. I studied that image for a moment longer than necessary, not searching for something new, but finally allowing myself to see what had always been there. I set the frame back down in its place, aligning it just as it had been before, but something about the gesture felt different now. Not routine. Intentional. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I poured myself a glass of water, watching the way it caught the light from the overhead fixture, steady and unremarkable. For years I had filled the space with noise. Phone calls, lists, plans, reminders. There had always been something to do, something to fix, something to prepare. Tonight, there was nothing waiting for me. No next task. No next request. Just stillness. I took a slow sip and leaned against the counter, letting that realization settle. It was not emptiness. It was space. Space I had never allowed myself to have before. My phone remained on the table in the other room, silent now, but I knew it would not stay that way forever. There would be more calls. More messages. Perhaps not tonight but soon. And when they came, they would carry the same expectation they always had. That I would step in. That I would solve it. That I would make things right, regardless of what had just happened. I set the glass down and wiped my hands on a towel, my movements slow and deliberate. For the first time, I did not feel the need to prepare an answer ahead of time. I did not rehearse explanations or soften my own thoughts. I simply stood there, aware of the quiet, aware of myself within it. I walked back into the living room and turned off the lamp near the window, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway. The shadows shifted gently across the walls, familiar yet newly defined. I sat down again, not out of habit, but because I chose to. Outside, the night had settled fully, the world beyond the glass dark and still. Somewhere miles away, the celebration would be winding down. Music fading. Guests leaving. Conversations ending. And perhaps, for the first time, things would not resolve themselves neatly. Not because I had created a problem, but because I had finally stepped out of the role that had kept everything else in place. I folded my hands together and rested them in my lap, my posture relaxed but steady. There was no anger in me. No urgency. Just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Not in her. Not in the situation. In me. And this time, I was not going to move to restore what had just broken. The night passed without interruption, but I did not sleep the way I used to. It was not restlessness or worry that kept me awake, but a quiet awareness that felt unfamiliar and strangely steady. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the house settling around me. Every so often, I would glance at the clock on the nightstand, watching the hours move forward without urgency. There was nothing I needed to fix before morning. No call I needed to return. No problem waiting for my attention. That realization alone felt like something I was still learning how to hold. When the sun finally rose, it came gently through the curtains, casting a pale light across the room. I sat up slowly, letting my feet rest on the floor for a moment before standing. The routine of the morning was still there, familiar and unchanged, but I moved through it differently. I made coffee, poured it into the same mug I had used for years, and stood by the window as the steam rose in thin, quiet lines. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Lawns trimmed. Driveways empty. A few early cars passing by without notice. The world had not shifted in any visible way. And yet, something within me had settled into a place I had not known before. My phone was still on the table where I had left it the night before. I had not checked it once. Not out of avoidance, but out of choice. When I finally walked over and picked it up, the screen lit up with missed calls and messages. Several from Emily. A few from numbers I recognized as vendors from the wedding. One from a number I did not know. I looked at the list without reacting, without the familiar pull to respond immediately. I set the phone back down. Not out of fear. Not out of anger. Simply because I was not ready to step back into that pattern. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat down, the morning light now filling the space with a quiet clarity. I let myself think, not in fragments or reactions, but fully. I thought about the years that had led to this moment. The choices I had made without question. The way I had measured my value by how well I could hold everything together for someone else. It had never felt like a burden at the time. It had felt like love. Like responsibility. Like purpose. And maybe, in many ways, it had been. But somewhere along the way, that purpose had shifted into expectation. And expectation had quietly become entitlement. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle into me. There was no sharp realization, no sudden clarity that came all at once. It was slower than that. More deliberate. Like watching something come into focus that had always been slightly out of reach. The phone remained silent now, but I knew it would not stay that way. The situation had not resolved itself overnight. If anything, it had only begun to unfold. But for the first time, I did not feel the need to step in and manage what came next. I did not feel the urgency to repair what had been disrupted. I simply sat there, in the quiet of my own home, understanding that whatever happened next would no longer be shaped by the version of me that had existed before last night. By mid-morning, the sunlight had shifted across the living room floor, tracing a slow path that made the passing hours feel almost visible. I had not turned on the television. I had not filled the silence with background noise the way I used to. Instead, I let the quiet remain uninterrupted, as if it were something that deserved space. Around 10 o'clock, the phone rang again. This time, I picked it up before it stopped, not out of urgency, but because I wanted to choose when and how I answered. The number was unfamiliar, but I already knew who it would be. "Mrs. Collins?" a polite voice asked as soon as I brought the phone to my ear. "This is Daniel from the venue. I was told you were handling the final payment for yesterday's event." His tone was careful, professional, the kind of voice that carried expectations without stating them directly. I stood near the window, looking out at the street as I listened. "I was involved in the earlier arrangements," I said evenly, "but I am not responsible for any remaining balance." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by a subtle shift in his tone. "I understand," he replied, though it was clear he did not fully. "We were informed that you were the primary contact for financial matters. The outstanding amount is still due, and we were hoping to resolve this quickly." I nodded slightly, even though he could not see me. "I am sure you were told that," I said. "But that information is no longer accurate." Another pause. Longer this time. "Would you like me to reach out to Ms. Carter directly then?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That would be appropriate." The conversation ended shortly after, polite and unresolved, the way many things tend to be when expectations are no longer met. I set the phone down again and remained where I was, my gaze still on the quiet street outside. A car passed slowly, then disappeared around the corner. Nothing else moved. For years I had been the person others called when something needed to be handled. When there was confusion, I clarified it. When there was a gap, I filled it. And when there was a bill, I paid it. Not because anyone forced me to, but because it had seemed easier than letting things fall apart. I turned away from the window and walked toward the bookshelf along the far wall. My fingers traced lightly along the spines of books I had not opened in years, titles I once told myself I would get back to when life slowed down. I paused on one, pulling it free and holding it for a moment before setting it on the table. It felt like a small decision, but it was not. It was another shift. Another quiet refusal to step back into the role I had outgrown without realizing it. My phone remained silent for a while, but not for long. When it lit up again, it was Emily. I watched her name appear on the screen, bright and familiar, just as it had been the night before. This time, I did not rush to answer. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then I picked it up. I did not speak first. Neither did she. For a moment, there was only the sound of 2 people on the same line, both waiting, but no longer in the same place. They called me, she said finally, her voice controlled but tight. They said you told them you are not paying. I leaned back slightly, my hand steady against the phone. That is correct, I replied. The silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It was confrontation. And for the first time, I did not feel the need to soften it. Do you have any idea what you are doing right now? She asked, her voice no longer controlled, no longer measured, but strained in a way I had not heard before. I remained still, my fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, my gaze steady on the book I had set down earlier. Yes, I said calmly. I do. There was a sharp exhale on the other end, followed by the sound of movement, as if she had stepped away from someone or something. This is not just about money, she continued, her words coming faster now. This is about my reputation. There are people involved. Vendors. Guests. You are making me look irresponsible. I listened without interrupting, letting each word land exactly where it was meant to. For years, I would have stepped in at this point, softened the situation, reassured her, found a way to absorb the pressure she was feeling. But I did not move to do that now. Emily, I said after a moment, my tone even. You asked me to leave your wedding. I told you that was different, she replied quickly, almost dismissively. You are holding on to something small and turning it into a much bigger issue. Something small. I let that phrase settle in the space between us. I thought about the coordinator approaching me with that careful smile. The way the doors had closed behind me. The way no one had followed. No one had asked. No one had noticed, or if they had chosen not to act. It was not small to me, I said quietly. There was a pause, not as long as before, but enough to shift the rhythm of the conversation. You are overreacting, she said, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Drama. Complications. I almost smiled again, but this time it came with a clearer understanding of what she meant. Not complications. Not drama. Discomfort. The kind that comes when something stops working the way it always has. What you were trying to avoid, I said slowly, was anything that did not fit the version of the day you wanted to present. She did not respond immediately. I could hear her breathing again, uneven, searching for something to say that would bring things back under control. I cannot believe you are choosing this moment to make a point, she said finally. After everything I have done to build this life. I looked down at my hands, still steady, still composed. And I cannot believe, I replied, that you think I am only here to support that life financially, regardless of how I am treated within it. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was not just tension. It was recognition, though she had not yet accepted it. So that is it? She asked, her voice lower now, quieter but edged with something sharper. You are just going to walk away? I considered the question for a moment, not rushing to answer it, not softening it into something easier to accept. No, I said finally. I already did that yesterday. There was no immediate reply. Just a stillness on the line that felt more final than anything we had said so far. I did not fill it. I did not explain further. For once, I allowed the silence to stand on its own, carrying the weight of everything that had led us here. The silence lingered for a few seconds after my last words, but this time it did not feel heavy. It felt settled, like something that had finally found its place. On the other end of the line, I could hear her breathing again, slower now, as if she were trying to gather herself, trying to reassemble a version of control that no longer fit the situation. "You are really serious about this?" she said at last, her voice quieter, stripped of the sharp edges it had carried before. It was not a question. It was an observation. "Yes," I replied simply. There was nothing more to add. No explanation that would make it easier. No justification that would make it acceptable. Just the truth, stated plainly. Another pause followed, but this one felt different. Not resistant. Not reactive. Just still. "I do not know how to fix this," she said after a moment, and for the first time, there was something in her voice I had not heard in years. Not anger. Not expectation. Uncertainty. I stood slowly and walked toward the window again, the morning now fully settled into the day, the light stronger, clearer. "That is not my responsibility anymore," I said, my tone calm, not unkind, but firm in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. She did not respond immediately. I imagined her standing somewhere on the other end, perhaps still in the same dress, perhaps surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that no longer felt complete. "So what happens now?" she asked finally. I looked out at the street, at the quiet rhythm of a world that continued without needing my involvement. A car passed. A neighbor stepped out to check the mail. Ordinary things. Unremarkable. Steady. "That depends on you," I said. "You made the decisions that led to this. You will have to decide what comes next." The words were not harsh. They were not meant to be. They were simply accurate. There was a long pause after that, longer than any before. I did not interrupt it. I did not soften it. I let it exist, exactly as it was. "I have to go," she said eventually, her voice distant now, as if her attention had shifted somewhere else, to something she could manage, something she could still control. "Yes," I replied. "You do." The line went quiet, and then it ended. I lowered the phone and set it down gently on the table, my hand lingering there for a moment before pulling away. The room was still. The same as it had been all morning. But I was not the same person sitting in it. I walked back to the bookshelf and picked up the book I had set aside earlier, turning it over in my hands as if reacquainting myself with something I had once known. I sat down again, opening it slowly, not rushing, not filling the space with anything unnecessary. Outside, the day continued, steady and unchanged. Inside, something had finally shifted into place. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not waiting for the next moment to define me. I was already there.